welcome back. I need to share my desktop so that I can see the slides. And here we go. Let's click on play. Well, so the topic of today is continuing on the DevOps track is releasing at the speed of light. So a little bit about me. My name is Almiray, and my current employer is Oracle. I work at the database group, despite all the content that I have for Java, and the whole reason is so that I can talk about the different products and projects that we do in open source with Java and the database. Yes, you heard that right. We do that. So if you have ever encountered any trouble or you're wondering about the things that we do, just talk to me. I'll be very, very happy to do that. But what we're not going to talk today about is about the release process on the database. So to give you an idea how this tool, JReleaser, came to be, I need to talk about the different set of projects in the open source that I work in on my daily work. One of these projects is called Iconly. And the idea of Iconly is to create a series of icons that you can apply to a Swing application or a JavaFX application so that your application looks much nicer. Okay, so building the desktop application, that's easy. It's not that troublesome. And once you package that, once you have to create the binary, what you like to do is push it somewhere so that your users can have access to. Now, is it enough to create a single jar or a zip file that contains the binaries and put it on a page and say, oh, I hope that my users will find it? Well, not really. There are a few things that we need to consider. Your end users probably already use some sort of platform-specific package manager, such as, for example, Homebrew, if you're on OS X and Linux, or Scoop if you're on Windows, or Snapcraft if you're on Linux, or a few other ones, right? And there is no tool coming from the Java space or the JDK that allows you to create such platform packages, right? The next thing is that even if you find a way to create those things, would you also like to announce when a release is ready? Would you like to post a release on a Git service if you're hosting your code on Git? Would you like to add documentation, release notes, change logs? So there are many other things that go around besides creating the binaries. There are more things that go around when you are talking about releases. And that's exactly the problem that I have. As I said, I had created a JavaFX application, but making it show that my users will be able to consume it much easily, that wasn't such an easy task. While I was pondering what to do with this particular application, I looked at other projects for inspiration. So here I have two projects. One of them is called GoReleaser and the other is called JBank. Last year, I started working with the Go programming language, and I built a small command line tool that I wanted to publish as well. As you may know, you can push Go source anywhere you want to on a Git repository, but that's not how users will typically consume your CLI applications. They would like to download a binary. Go can compile to many different platforms in a single node. And once you do that, what else would you have to do in order to package the binary so that the users can find all the information? Well, GoReleaser knows that. It knows how to do everything that I just described, plus a few more things. And that's exactly the tool that I wanted for my JavaFX application. Problem is, it only works for Go code, not Java. On the other side, you have JBank, which is a Java-based CLI tool that allows you to launch Java source files as if they were scripts. You can also launch jars. You can launch it from local, from remote. It has plenty of features. And like a CLI tool, it also relies on the users being able to download it from many places. So Max Anderson, the creator of JBank, replicated many of the features that GoReleaser has, but for JBank and just for JBank. So we both were talking one day and figure out, like, what if we asked this question? What if there was a way to reuse the know-how of JBank for Java applications while also doing the stuff that GoReleaser can do? And that's exactly how this tool came out to be. This is why it's known also as JReleaser. So what it is actually JReleaser? You build your project using standard build tools, the tools that you already know, be it Apache Ant, Apache Maven, or Gradle, or anything else, and you create a binary release. That could be a zip file that contains the script, launches, and leaves, and jars, or a targc, or something else. You supply that to JReleaser plus a model, some definition of metadata about your project. And JReleaser can do the following. It can create a Git release page on popular Git services such as GitHub, GitLab, GitHub, or it can create platform-specific packagers such as Homebrew, Snapcrap, Scoop, and a few others, even JBank. And also, it can announce a release on popular distribution channels such as Twitter, SDKman, Zulip, and whatnot. Okay. How does it do it? Well, JReleaser is pretty much, the engine is a template engine. You supply some basic inputs, and based on the model, it will generate a bunch of files needed for the package managers or for everything else. JReleaser works in like a monolith. It's one command that does everything. And whether you want everything or not, that's besides the point. It will do everything for you. Whereas JReleaser gives you the option to also do everything in one go, or be more specific into certain aspects of their release. So if you only care about doing a Git release and nothing more, then you can invoke their release command, and that will in turn invoke every other command that you see there on the blue column. If you only care about creating a Docker image and not even publishing, then you can just invoke the package command. Or if you want to publish a saved image and create it from scratch, and you simply can invoke publish. So the full release command, the orange one, does everything for you. And every other command can also be invoked independently. JReleaser expects the binaries to exist already, again, created by other means. But it does provide one additional alternative, which is the assemble command. If you want to create cross-platform Java runtimes with JLink, then JReleaser knows how to do that. If you want to create native executables with GraalVM native image, then JReleaser can also do that for you. Or you can again use Maven, Gradle, or every other build tool that you already have to your disposal. The bottom line is a JReleaser, as opposed to JReleaser, is much more flexible. So you can invoke things in the big space on in the small scale. In terms of integrations, well, I already mentioned a couple of the Git services. So we have GitHub, GitLab, and Gitya. Gitya is something that you probably will be running on your own. There's also another website called Codeberg that runs on Gitya. It's a free service for hosting Git. And if you happen to be using another different Git service, maybe it's Bitbucket or Amazon Code Commit or something else, you can still use the generic Git bridge, but you won't be able to create a Git release yet. That's something that will be working in the future. If you want to upload binaries to some other place that is not a Git release page, then you have the options for JAVAPRO Artifactory, or a standard HTTP server that accepts a post or a put operation. By the way, something that I failed to mention before, even though you may be talking about GitLab or GitHub and the others, which technically you will do for open source or, yeah, basically that, you can also use JReleaser with commercial source, because why not? And you can also talk to GitHub Enterprise or your own custom GitLab instance. To JReleaser is just a matter of configuring what is the right address to the repository and the server, and off you go. There is no difference. It's just the standard API for other services, GitHub or GitLab or whatever. If you want to create a platform-specific packager, then we have these choices. We have Homebrew for OS X and Linux, Chocolatey for Windows, Docker for everywhere where Docker runs. JBank also allows you to invoke a Java jar from the network, so that's also useful. A Scoop is like Homebrew but for Windows. SDK-man works on all platforms pretty much, and Snap is for Linux, and I think it's also possible with OS X, but not that many people use it, if I'm not mistaken. And finally, you can announce a release to many different distribution channels. The most popular ones will be SDK-man or Twitter or Slack, but we also support many others. And we support custom webhooks. So if a service is not listed here, but it supports incoming webhooks, it's just a matter of configuring the URL and off you go. So how would you launch a tool like this one? So JRelease is actually deployable in many different ways. But if you were to just run it from the command line, here's how you would do it. If you're on OS X, then use SDK-man. That would be my first choice. If you're already an SDK-man user, so you know what to do. Or you can launch it via JBank, which you can also install via SDK-man. And this way, you will be able to launch the latest version of JRelease, the latest stable. Or you use brew, because why not? Use homebrew. Or you can go to the release page and download either of these two zip files. The first one, like every other aspect before, it expects a specific Java runtime to exist on your machine. It may be Java 8 as a minimum. But if you want to download a version that contains a custom Java runtime plus the JReleaser CLI, then use the JReleaser standalone. So you download this one, you don't need any previous Java, and just run it and it works. For Linux, the instructions are pretty much the same. So SDK-man, JBank, or download a zip file, for which there are two versions for the standalone. The first one is for distributions that work with glibc, such as Ubuntu. And the other one is for distributions that use a muscle, such as Linux Alpine. And for Windows, we also have SDK-man or JBank. You have Scoop instead of Homebrew. And you also have the choice of downloading the zip file and run it with a previous installation of Java, or the standalone version that comes with a custom Java runtime. You may also use this particular script. The Java 10 added an option called launch from source, so that can execute a single Java source file just as it goes. So this particular script is very plain. It has no strings attached. There's nothing weird happening. It will know exactly which version to download if you give it as an argument. It will download it from the JReleaser release page, pull in a jar, and then you can invoke this jar. But this requires Java 11 as a minimum, because that's the bytecode that was used to compile this particular jar file. Or you can use Docker if you want to, for which we have two different images. The first one is for Ubuntu-based, and the second one is for Linux Alpine. You may run the CLI with any of the things that I just mentioned, or you can also run JReleaser as a Maven plugin, or as a Gradle plugin, or a set of Apache N-tests. So we cover almost all bases. If you were to be using another tool that is not covered here, well, please let us know and we will fix that. You can run JReleaser on your local environment, but you can also run it on a CI environment. And we have guides that cover all these different services. We do have a specific support for GitHub Actions. There is a JReleaser action that's very easy to configure. And the Docker image is also aware of the particulars of GitLab CI. So you can use it directly as is on GitLab CI. In terms of inputs, these are the things that you will supply to the tool. It's a binary distribution, so basically a zip or a tarball. There are Maven plugins and Gradle plugins that can generate the appropriate structure, so don't worry too much about that. But you can also use a single jar, an over jar, an executable jar, or you can create a JLink distribution, again, using Maven, Gradle, or even JReleaser. Or you can create a GraalVM native image using native image utility from the outside or within JPackage. And a native package that is typically created, well, in the case of Java, something that you will create using JPackage, so such DMG or a PKG for OS X, MSI or XE for Windows, or Debian or RPM for Linux. So those are also supported as inputs for JReleaser. So enough of this. Let's go into the demo. So what I'm going to show here I do have one Git repository, one GitHub repository here with a trivial application. It has no tags and it has no releases. So the first thing that I'm going to do is figure out which version of JRelease I have. So let's do SDK list JRelease, and that will tell me that I have 7 versions of JRelease already available, and I'm currently working on the latest snapshot, so that's what is there. I do have JRelease 07, which is the latest version, so we can verify that. Yes, that is correct. And so what I'm going to do now is build the application, which happens to be just a regular Maven application. So we ended up having a tar.gc and a zip file, so that's good. We can see that there is the POM file, even though right now there is a JReleaser YAML file that contains the model definition, we're not going to use it right now. And this POM file, it's only concerned on building the application. It does not have the JReleaser Maven plugin yet. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a very trivial release for this application. It's doing it like so. JRelease release, and we say autoconfig. So I want to grab information from the current environment. So that is the Git metadata. And if I have any specific environment variables that follow certain parameters or certain conventions, it will pick them up. But for now, I'm going to say that this is version 1.0. And let's see what happens. Here we go. So it tells us that JReleaser has auto-configured on. It detected some settings. From this location is grabbing the GitHub token. This is where I set up my secrets locally, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to talk to GitHub. Then it says something more like, okay, it's generating the changelog. That's good. It doesn't calculate any checksums because I didn't give any input files. Also, it doesn't sign any files because, again, no input files. There's nothing to upload to Artifactory, and it's only uploading an empty checksums file for you. Good. So we go here, do a refresh, and now I have a tag, and I have a release. The release is very simple. It's based on the metadata, and it just lists every single commit. Now, you will notice that some of these commits follow a particular pattern. This is a pattern that you are in control. You can put it on the title. You can put it on the body. You can define anything you want to. This is not specific to JReleaser. This is just for this example only. Based on these patterns, I will be able to do more about making the change of prettier. But one thing that I'm going to do is start doing that thing prettier. So the next thing I'm going to do is do changelog formatted. So give it an option to format that. And if I click enter, it's going to fail because the release already exists and I didn't set that I want to override it. Here we go, release it, and there is a failure. GitHub release failed because release 100 already exists and override is set to false. How do we fix that? Easy. Simply say override. And run it again. And now this will drop the existing release, retag, and create a release and do what we want. So now we do a refresh here. Whoops, what happened? There we go. Oh, it was set as a draft. There we go. And now the change looks like this. There's one thing that I'm going to do. I don't know why I set it as a draft. Let's discard it for now because we're going to reuse it. So I have the tag, I don't have a release. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is, well, the change look very plain. So let's try to add more pizzazz to it. And that's where I'm going to talk about the model itself. Now I'm going to make use of this file. It's a regular standard YAML file, but if you don't like YAML, that's fine. We also support the JSON or TOML for this file. Or you can use the Maven DSL or the Kotlin DSL or Groovy DSL if you're doing a Gradle. So we have some metadata about the project, which is useful when we want to generate platform packages such as Homebrew and whatnot. So we'll see that in a moment when we generate Homebrew. And we have information about our release. We want to release to GitHub, so that's good. We want to create a discussion for this release based on this category. Okay, we're also going to override. We're going to sign commits. That's good. And we have some format for the changelog. So we're going to format every single time. This will be the entry for each one of those commits. I want to format contributors as well, so we'll see that come in a moment. And what these features are doing is matching, using regular expressions, the prefix that I have for each commit, so that given this commit prefix, I will apply a label, and you can apply as many as you want. Then you use categories based on labels, which you can have as many. You will match that to that particular category. And finally, I want to remove those prefixes because I don't want to see them already. By default, the replace is an empty string, so I don't have to say anything. If I wanted to replace with something else, then I will put another property called replace. I will also sign all artifacts. I will create a homebrew formula. And these are the inputs, the binaries, the zip file, and the tar.gc. So here we go. Now we can say again, JReleaser release, and this will only create the Git release. Or I can say full release, which will create the Git release. It will create the homebrew packager, and it will announce. But for now, we don't have any announcement set up. Yeah, let's do that. So here we go. Now calculates the checksums for the input files. You can change the algorithm, but by default it's always SHA-256, but you can add more. It signs all the artifacts, so that's good. No uploading to Artifactory because we didn't configure it. Creates the Git release and uploads all the different assets, so the binaries, the checksums, and the signatures for all these files. Then it creates a distribution for Homebrew, creates the formula, then publishes to a specific repository, which will match again my GitHub credentials. And it does not perform any announcement because there's nothing that needs to be announced, and there's nothing that I configure. Finally, it outputs configure properties, and we can have a look at what those properties are in case you're interested, because you may not need to use these properties if you're running on CI. For example, what is the latest hash when the release was made? So this is the hash that matches the tag. The version of Java that you used to run, which the version number of the project with different values and whatnot. So more information about that. And in case that something went wrong, you also have access to the full trace log. Whoop, that was too fast. And that contains every single bit of information that JReleaser did, including the evaluation of the full model, which everything is set right here. So if you have a doubt of what particular value is being used for a particular section of the model, then here you can tell it. You also can ask the JReleaser config, and that will tell you what is the current settings for the model, which will match some of the stuff that we said. Right. Okay, let's go back to GitHub. And here, we do a refresh, and we have that release. Notice how the changelog looks now. I have different inputs here, different categories. The prefix is gone. There is at least one commit that did not match any of the labels, so it's left out like this. The contributors are now formatted and have a link to the author, and I have all the release assets. There is this link here that says join release discussion. We click on it, and we get moved into the discussions tab, which is posted on the announcements category because that's what we said. And now you can comment on this particular release. Also, if we go into Homebrew tab, we see that a formula has been updated just recently. And this formula was created based on a template. If I were to set up my Homebrew tab repository on my local Homebrew version, then I can install this particular application and it will just work. So that's nice for GitHub. What if I wanted to use something else? Let's go to GitLab. In this case, it's a very similar application. The only change is I want to publish to GitLab. And I don't have any links to any discussions because GitLab doesn't have that feature. So once I have this, I can go and show that on GitLab, there are no tags, there are no releases, there's nothing like that. And I can issue the same command as before. So let's make sure that first that we have built the binaries. There we go. And I can issue the same command earlier, which will be JReleaser full release. And let's see what it does. It calculates the checksums, it signs the files, it uploads to GitLab, and then it should generate a homebrew formula in just a moment. There we go. Publishes to GitLab Almiray homebrew tab, and there is no announcement. So we go here, do a refresh, and now have a tag. We click on that one, and there's a link to the release. We click on the release, and we get the release assets and the changelog, just like we expected. And now if I move to Homebrew tab, I have this repository created automatically by JReleaser if it didn't exist before. It has been updated very recently, so right now, and it has created a formula, which now this one refers to this URL instead of this one where it refers to GitHub. Pretty good. All right, finally, let's move into Codeberg. So this is GitHub based and is the same thing. So we're going to build the binary. There we go. And now we're going to show the configuration file, which is almost identical, except that now we're going to release to Codeberg instead of GitLab. And everything else stays the same if I wanted to. All right. So let's do, again, the same command, full release. And checksum, signs, uploads. This one is pretty fast. And we go here, do a refresh. And certainly there is a release, which is right there in the same format as before, same release assets. And if I go into Homebrew tab, here we go. This is a brand new repository. I did not create it before, so everything was created by the JReleaser bot. And we look here into the formula, and the formula now lists that it goes to Codeberg instead of the other URL. So that's it. I'm able to push now the same source code into different repositories and have a very similar experience using an homogeneous model within all the different services. Of course, this is the basis. You may or may not want to publish binaries. You may perhaps just want to create a Git release. And I want to show you a project, the Moditech project, which just posted a release a few days ago. It has a Maven plugin and it has a library, but Moditech uses JReleaser just to create a Git release like this. And we look something like this. It uses, I believe, the Maven DSL for configuring this. So we don't have that many prefixes to identify the different items, but you get something that looks like this, and we get the contributors, and there are no assets. There's another project, Casey Cuddle, which creates native images, Graal native images based on Quarkus. This is a project that looks like kubectl, but for Kafka Connect. So given that it creates binaries that are specific for a platform, you have to run the Maven build in Linux, OS X, and Windows. Collect those binaries and then put them together into a release. If I show you the Maven DSL, this is the full build of Casey Cuddle. Here is the Maven plugin being in use, the latest version. And I'm going to change what is the final version number with this thing. So it will just be 100 early access instead of 100 snapshot, which is the version in the POM file. I will say that instead of being a regular Java binary distribution, I will say that now it's a native image because that changes the templates for the different packages that we're going to use if we ever make to use them. And then I just define the list of artifacts that I want to use. One more thing is that this is the version that contains 1.0 snapshot, and this is the version that will contain 1.0.0 early access. So you can rename files or actually transform files while you're doing the release. So all these settings allow me to create a release that looks like this. There is a basic changelog, so I didn't configure any formatting, but here are the release assets. There is no signatures, but I do have the checksums because that's how this particular project has been set up. There's nothing more. Okay, there are other things that I could show you. For example, if we go to the JReleaser.org website, this is where you can get the list of all the information. So this is something that we already see in an explanation of what JReleaser is and the workflow, how you can get started quickly with different tools. If you want to know more about every single option that you can invoke, for example, on the CLI, well, download the CLI and use it, or just click here, and this will tell you every single command. You want to know what are the different commands for Maven? Well, there you go. These are the different goals, are also different tasks for Gradle and whatnot. Would you like to know how you can configure JReleaser? For example, let's look at the homebrew packager. Go here. Well, you have lots of settings. I only activated in the example, but I can certainly use much more than that. I can set every single thing. So this is the default name of the repository, but it could have been everything, something else. So you can change that. And as I said earlier, you don't like YAML? That's okay. Use TOML or JSON or the Maven DSL or the Gradle DSL. Every single snippet in the configuration is mapped to the 5 different syntaxes. So it's very easy to find your way around and to copy and paste in case that you need to do something. There are ready-made examples as well of how you can do this. In particular, JReleaser's release, because obviously JReleaser releases itself. So there is a configuration here for JReleaser for generating a lot of things. Here's the changelog. Here, signing configuration and checksum, and I'm going to announce to Twitter. And I'm also going to create custom Java runtimes for JReleaser for 4 different targets: OS X, Linux, Linux Alpine, and Windows. And I will also publish to Homebrew and Scoop and Snapcraft and JBank and SDK Man, because why not? So I'm making something that I would like my users to be able to download from many different places, and a few other things. So that's the one for the end task and the jar, the CLI jar that you run, and here's the way that you can create Docker images based on the JLink assemblies that we defined earlier. So all these things let me create a release that looks like this: the changelog that is format, and the list of assets. And because I have a link to a discussion, it will generate this. But furthermore, it will also update the release Docker image repository with the sources of the image, and will publish to Docker Hub. It will create a JVan catalog alias. It will publish to the Snapcraft build store. It will publish to Scoop and Homebrew as well. Everything handled with just one configuration file. So that's pretty much for the demo. Oh, where is it? Here we go. Right. So what is coming on in the future? Because there are a few things that we would like to address. Specifically, additional Git releases. So people have asked for Bitbucket, and of course there's Azure DevOps and a few other Git services. So as time passes by, we may add a specific support for these Git services. Additional upload services such as, let's say, Amazon S3 buckets, because why not, besides JFrog Artifactory or HTTP. Or again, it could be Azure, it could be Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, it could be any cloud provider. And even though right now you can publish binaries created with JPackage, One thing that we look into is a way to invoke JPackage from within JReleaser in order to reuse the model that you already have in your project. It will be similar in a way that we create currently the Graal native images. JPackage must run on a specific node. There's no way that you can do cross-platform, sadly. But given that we already have both ways of doing assemblies with JLink and Graal, doing the same thing or similar thing with JPackage is not that different. It's just a matter of applying the correct configuration. I have some resources for you. The main page of the project, you have already seen it, is jreleaser.org. The project, the code lives at github.com jreleaser. We have an open collective for jreleaser if you are keen in supporting us and donating and sponsor the project. And of course, we have a Twitter account where we make announcements whenever there's something new, there's a new feature, or something interesting about the tool, or someone has made use of jreleaser in a particular way.
Sorry for interrupting you. There is a question in the chat.
I'm going to click on the chat, and it says, is the jreleaser Maven plugin also released in the same go, including pushing to Maven Central? It is released as part of the release process, yes, but it's not released as part of the jreleaser invocation. So I can show you that. We go back here, and I do make releases with GitHub Actions. This is very interesting. I go here into Actions, and the way that I have this configured, it says release workflow. I just trigger this and I say which version I want to release. Now this makes use of both Maven, Gradle, and jreleaser. If we look at the workflow here, did I say Maven? I think this is only Gradle. It sets the version, so creates a commit, builds the project, and deploys to Maven Central using standard Gradle plugins. This is the Nexus Gradle plugin, so it's not jreleaser the one that does it. Then invokes jreleaser, the releaser action for assembling the JLink images, and then invokes jreleaser again. It has to be in 2 steps to create the final release, the full release. And notice that both times it's making use of jreleaser, the latest early access. So it consumes the latest snapshot to generate the next version, whether that is a snapshot as early access or a final release. And on my local environment, you saw that I was referring to a config toml file that contains all my secrets. In CI, I could use that, or I could use directly environmental variables that are fed from GitHub secrets. So it's up to you to decide that. And that's exactly how it does. So yes, the Maven plugin is part of the release process, but it's not part of the release performed by jreleaser itself. All right. So it looks like Peter, Theo, I answered your question. If you have any other questions, do let me know. I think that I finished a little bit earlier, so we have time for questions, but let me finish with the slides. So everything that we saw today is open source. And if you have not contributed to open source before, it's very easy. You find a problem with what we saw today or any other open source project that you consume in your daily work, file a ticket. That's it. There's nothing else that you need to do. Engage in a conversation with the people at the other side. Let them know something is not working correctly, or maybe there is a feature that would be great to add. There's something that is missing. Whatever it is, just file a ticket. If you have the time and the passion, maybe supply some test code or even supply a patch. You don't have to become a contributor or a committer on your first try. Just open a ticket. And as time passes by, maybe if you are keen into it, you get more into the project and become a contributor or become a committer. That's the things that I like about open source, is that you don't have to go all the way. You decide how much you got to get involved into a particular community. So with this, I think this is everything that I have prepared for you. But of course, This is one of the tools that I'm quite passionate about. And if not saying anything else, I will keep talking and talking and talking until someone says, next speaker. So I wonder if there are any other questions that you might be interested in asking. Feel free to use the chat, or you mute yourself. Just gonna put the Zoom window here on the front so that I can be looking at the camera. And so the question from Theo, is this only for Java binaries or could be used for a web app or microservice? It depends, Theo. So if you want to create a Git release for a web app or a microservice, yes, you can do that. If you want to push that web app or microservice into also do a deployment, it depends. If you want to deploy as a Docker image, the JReleaser can do that for you. Or if you want to deploy to, I don't know, some other repository or some other kind of online service, well, that's not something that JReleaser does right now. So deployment per se is not JReleaser's fault. It's part of the release process, but it's not something that JReleaser does itself. Just like it is not its job right now, currently, to publish releases to Maven Central. That is still the job of your build tools, such as Maven, Gradle, or something else. All right. Is it possible to get assembly from Jenkins? Yes. If you want to build binaries in Jenkins, you can run JReleaser on Jenkins. There's a guide for it. And the next step will be, depending on how you configure the build pipeline, you can consume those artifacts directly into the next step, which will be the release process. Or if you happen to be building artifacts with different nodes, Windows and Linux, you may eventually collect all of them and then go into the next step into the pipeline when you do perform the actual release. I hope that answered your question a little bit. Okay. Is there something else that's all right? Well, so again, I'm quite excited about this particular tool, and since I started using it, I have migrated pretty much all of my projects to do this, so that now I can, if I need to, I can do a release from my local machine, or I can do a release on CI, as easy as just clicking the proverbial release button, as I showed you with kicking up a GitHub workflow. It's just as simple as that once you have the release process. It takes a little bit of back and forth, figuring out how the release process can actually work, especially when you need to coordinate with your build tool in Maven or Gradle, where you want to use a Maven perform release, or use do not use the release plugin, but use Nexus or something else. But once you have it setting, once you have it automated, it just keeps working and working and working, unless, well, you update your version of Gradle and then things get broken again. So the thing is that it's worth investing in automating your release pipelines as much as you can. You won't be disappointed. The next time you make a release, is just a matter of just clicking one button, maybe supplying a couple of inputs, like the version as I showed you, and off you go. No worries, the pipeline will work, and then at the end of the execution, you get a bunch of binaries and platform packagers, and maybe a couple of announcements on email or Discord or Twitter, what have you, whatever communication channel you choose to let your users or your consumers know that there is a new release for your particular project. Yeah, so that's how it works. It's quite interesting. And we will keep updating the project to add the features that make sense. So if you find that something is not working correctly with JReleaser, or maybe there's a service that we're missing in an integration, well, let us know. Open a ticket. Just said earlier, start a conversation and we see where we can take things. All right. Any additional questions that you may have? If not, that's okay. I hope that you enjoy the session and that it proved to be useful to your daily work. And we still have a few more events, more sessions going on for JCON. So I hope that you have enjoyed the conference so far. It's quite a bit weird still being online, but it is what it is. Hopefully next year we will see each other face to face or some other place. So thank you again for your time. Thank you very much for your choice. And keep on working with Java. Keep on enjoying what you do. Thank you.